Hey, Ray, wouldn't it be great to have a guy on the show who was an integral part of the New York City punk rock scene in the 1970s that also happens to own some of Tony Gwynn's batting gloves and a baseball that was signed by an angry Yogi Berra?
You know, Adrian, coincidentally, I think I know a guy.
That's me.
Oh, if only you knew how to grow a pineapple as well.
Well, you do what one can.
Hey, this is my friend, Ray.
What's up? This is my friend AD.
Ray is a tour manager who's traveled the world with everyone from the Beastie Boys to the Rolling Stones, engineered artists from Devo to Jane's Addiction to Tony Braxton, and looked after the careers of comics like Jim Gaffigan and Dane Cook.
And AD is a national radio personality, heard on stations across the country, who started off as a major label recording artist that gave me my first job as a tour manager.
I still can't believe that ended well.
Well, we still talk all the time now, and when we do, it's about music and cooking and baseball, especially our beloved New York Mets.
This is Bands, Barbecue, and Baseball.
Does anybody need a pee break before we get this started?
Sounds like you do.
Well, I'm going to roll with it. How about that?
Yeah, let's do this with the need to pee tension. Right. Give it a sense of urgency.
It gives me focus.
Keeps you on edge.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, yours truly and Ray Amico are privileged to be joined today by the great Robert Allen Miltenberg. Welcome to the show, Robert.
Yay.
Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Ray.
So, Robert, you have
great to be here.
Great to have you here. You have done so many things. Your career is a storied one. Basically, you were an advertising copywriter, and somehow you managed to spin that into all sorts of adventures in the music business and in baseball, which makes you a perfect guest for this show. But I have a big question for the two of you. How on earth did you come to meet and work with each other? Take it away.
Ray?
Well, I could say this. First of all, this is an opportunity for me to have two of my oldest friends. One of which is a really old man, and the other is a really long time. Robert and I know each other literally over 25 years, just the same as Adrian, you and I know each other. Our history dates back to my first involvements with the band Devo, and are starting to interact there. And as I became friends with Robert and learned more about him and what he does over all these years. It's literally like just layers and layers. He's an onion. I mean, it just keeps coming in layers and layers and layers of his history as a writer and an artist and a musician and an educator and the inventor of his own musical instruments, combined with his love for baseball, which is a commonality that he and I both have, plus our music backgrounds. Not only from being with Devo together, but we both have a deep, deep love of the band Jethro Tull, and we just literally started traveling on these parallel lines over all these years that has drawn us together to where now we're in touch literally all the time, just to bust each other's balls about what's going on in baseball on our respective teams of the Mets, and he's a Yankee fan and everything. So Robert's history is, like I said, it's a multi-layered onion of amazing stories and everything. So Robert, basically remind myself. The first time that you and I actually interacted was at Devo Studios at Mutato, where you were working, obviously, in your role there, handling licensing and executive producer of a lot of things. Tell the folks a lot about what you were doing there in that role.
But before you do, tell me exactly what you thought of Ray when you first met him.
Wow. I actually thought that Ray was, how can I put this? I thought he was an interesting politician. That's what I thought. He was one of the greatest diplomats I'd ever met in my life. When you know what the business is like, you know that his position is one that actually he would have made a great juggler, somewhere back in vaudeville, because the ability to actually do what he does takes a great deal of dexterity as well as diplomacy. But that was exactly the first thing I thought of him. And I can tell you, my relationship in a sense with Devo actually goes back to my days when I would go to CBGB's back in the day, in actually 77. And the very first time I saw Devo in 77, something told me that one day I would be working with them. And actually, I started when I was in advertising in Los Angeles back in the late 80s. I discovered that Devo was doing commercials and Mark Mothersbaugh was doing commercials for different agencies.
Oh, this is very, very interesting, because you found yourself a completely unique lane. Because a lot of people might go, how does an advertising guy look at a band playing CBGBs and go, I'm going to work with them? And you found a really, really interesting and unique way. You identified like a completely individual career path. This is good stuff. Go on. Sorry, I just wanted to point it out. It's amazing what you did.
No, I appreciate that. From the very first moment I was in advertising, I actually was involved with music production, because the very first thing I ever did was in Shako Shangi's For Colored Girls Who've Considered Suicide, When the Rainbow Was Enough, doing a series of radio commercials with the cast of that and actually having them sing and do things like dancing in the streets for commercials for the show. The next thing I did was work with James Earl Jones when he was performing Paul Robeson on Broadway. And as you know, Paul Robeson was a great opera singer back in the day. But my experience certainly went from that. And in doing commercials, you always need music. And as time went on, I used Devo and I used Mothersbaugh more and more in Los Angeles, to the point where one day I actually called Mothersbaugh at the same time. He was basically thinking the same thing. And I said to him, you know how I've been bringing, jobs to you this way? And he said, I've been thinking of this the same way. Why don't you come here and do that with us? And that's what I started to do. And I became the executive producer over at Mutato Musica and started to actually bring in jobs. So rather than a company like Warner Brothers license the original Whip It for a variety of commercials, which back in the day, Whip It would be used for so many different advertising products and services, we invented the idea of re-records, and which we would do a cover of a hit song exactly the way it was recorded, but with better fidelity. And I would actually approach the advertiser and we would get to sell the re-record rather than the original. And nobody ever noticed the difference.
So you came up with the idea of Xing record labels out of advertising profits because you weren't using their masters. You, along with Mark Mothersbaugh of Devo, were recreating records, and then you were getting them placed in commercials, making the artist who wrote the music and Mark Mothersbaugh a tidy package, I would imagine, and making folks like Warner Brothers Records go, I can afford a lot less this week. What's going on?
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know that I would be able to claim that I invented it, but we definitely popularized it. And definitely made it a mainstream device, because after that, many bands were doing the same thing.
So basically what you did was you made a career out of sticking it to the man. This is a fantastic start to this show. That's great.
Something I'm very proud of. That's exactly right. It was something that actually was a blow for rock and roll bands against the corporate giants.
That's good.
Well, that history of Robert's back into the early punk rock days in not only New York City, but then obviously in the 80s in LA, which was a magnet of that type, that kind of music and that style and everything like that. Robert's background in that certainly was an influence into that. And when we started working together, through Devo, that brought us to a lot of different businesses. Whereas if Devo was doing shows, my interaction with them was related specifically to the shows, and I would come down to Mutato and kind of be a fly on the wall of what was going on in there, and then we would go out and do Devo shows, and Robert would come down and step back into the live world with us and get a chance to be on the other side of what was going on in that world. But that also traveled parallel to your music and the music that you were creating of your own, Robert, because I want to remind everyone of your own individual music and, the things that you've been actually doing over all these years.
Well, I appreciate that, Ray. I would tell you that what fascinated me about you was how many of our interests dovetailed. And when you talk about my basis in music, it actually did in many ways begin with Jethro Tull. And my actual entry into advertising was inspired by Ian Anderson because I had actually been in a teaching program at Tulane University. And I saw that Tull, and this was in November of '77, was going to be playing in New Orleans. And something came into my head saying, because I had done a lot of interviews at an independent college paper, the Independent Alligator. I graduated from the University of Florida in Gainesville before going to Tulane. And in Tulane, at this college, scholarship that I had, it was for becoming a teacher. But I went and did this, went and saw this show of Tull, and something said I was going to get an interview and that I would not rest until I did. And I ended up actually doing an ad hoc interview of Ian Anderson at his hotel without his knowing it the very next day. And that motivated me actually in just doing that and getting through to him, because he was very difficult in those days, to actually quit my scholarship and move to New York and find a job in advertising. And through all those things, I was always originally, I was playing flute, and I had bought a flute from somebody who had made it out of bamboo. And it occurred to me that I could, once I moved to LA, that I could basically do the same thing. So I started making my own flutes out of bamboo and started playing them and making panpipes and different things of that sort and recording that. And then I
have a quick question before we get into that.
Sure.
You obviously, Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull represented a massive pivotal moment in your life. You went from being a college student to kind of picking a career after talking to him the way you did. You've gotten a chance to work with and meet and hang out with all sorts of musicians. Were you ever able to circle back to him and go, "Hey, guess what I'm doing now, Ian, and guess why?"
Good question. You know what, Adrian? I always wanted to, but my only connection there has actually been through Ray. And I was fascinated to learn that actually Ray himself, in his early musical career, had the great privilege of working with Anderson himself. And that is actually the only connection I've had. I've been always dying to ask Ian if he remembers that crazy little long-haired guy in the brown corduroy suit. I actually always thought that his writing the song One Brown Mouse was inspired by me, but that's probably just ego.
You never know. I like your chance. It's interesting you should say that. And you're talking about our first impressions of Ray. My first memory of Ray was like, "Hi, I'm Ray. Did you know that Ian Anderson from Jethro Tull played a flute solo on my hardcore band's record?" Anyways, nice to meet you.
It was totally true. And that's yet another parallel of me and Robert's lives, and the fact that our lead singer, Kurt Stenzel, having been a devotee of Jethro Tull and following him around the world, talked Ian into playing on our first Sex and Violence record, and I have a duet with Ian and I on a song about going to the bathroom. It was just literally parallel courses.
Not only that, I remember because I went to shake your hand upon first meeting you, and instead of getting a handshake, I got a Sex and Violence CD, and I looked at the back of it, and I was just like, "Oh man, there's actually a thing that Ian Anderson wrote about the band." And I even remember the verb. I was so impressed. Like, it sounds like I am, of course, slightly busting one's balls, but I was so impressed because I looked on the back of it and it's like Ian Anderson, Jethro Tull, Sex and Violence. That's a proper band, isn't it? I think that was what he said, right?
Yeah, that's exactly
what he said. They're a proper band. I don't know how I remember this, but I do.
High praise.
Yeah. So I will at some point get a chance to ask Ian about you, Robert, to see what he remembers. So I'll take the lead on that.
I have a small Ian. I have a small Ian Anderson. It's so funny. I just thought of this recently. I have a small Ian Anderson touchstone as well, and it's nowhere near as cool as either of yours. But would you like to hear it?
Sure.
Absolutely.
So when we first started in the band, I was literally a teenager. I had no bills, no rent, no sort of outgoings of any sort whatsoever. All the other guys in the band were sort of like married and had all this sort of stuff that, they were just about getting by. Me, I lived in hotel rooms that somebody else paid for and a tour bus that somebody else paid for. So within about, a year, I had more money than I'd ever seen in my life because I hadn't spent anything, literally anything. And it was maybe a couple $1,000s, but like to a teenager, it seemed like all the money in the world. And I remember watching a documentary about money with Ian Anderson, about rock stars and money. And he said, he was like, very early on, 1,000 pounds rained down on my head in quarters. And I took it to the bank and said, put this in a safe place. I'll be back for it years from now. And I was like, I should do that. I should do what Ian Anderson did. So I had like my tiny little sort of like life savings. And I was like, I'm going to Ian Anderson this. Off I go to Charles Schwab to do the right thing. And somebody called me and asked me to do something different. I skipped it and was penniless in a couple of years. And so like whenever I think, boy, things could have been better if I just paid more attention to Ian Anderson, I'm like, yeah, no,
But Ian
Anderson reminds me of my biggest youthful failing.
But this is exactly why you now own a salmon farm in Scotland, because you follow the tech path as Ian, and you're making Hanover fish.
Yeah.
Oh, ba-dum boom.
Oh, wow. You know what? You really had to work to get that one in there, but it was absolutely worth it. Well done. Okay. All right. But you know what, Ray? When it comes to the fish puns, you really ought to scale back. Go on, Robert. Continue.
Well, is that something to do with Anderson's cod piece?
I don't know, but I feel like we're all carpeing the DM.
Pretty fishy, you guys.
If you've got any more, let me know.
Oh my God. Well, you know what? In terms of obviously music and backgrounds, etc., Robert and I also got to actually work together on a project only a couple of years ago when I was doing the soundtrack and score for a Italian English gangster film, basically.
You guys, hold on. You guys worked together on the soundtrack to an Italian gangster film. You know what that is? That's very sophisticated. Go on.
Oh, God. I'd like to whip you with some redfish.
Well, yes. In fact, a couple of years ago when I got approached to do the soundtrack for the film Unredeemed, there was a big segment of the film that had to do with a Irish priest who was basically serving time in the Vatican, and it related obviously to his Irish history and his Irish boxing background. And so I like how you say obviously it related to the priest boxing background, because a priest hasn't gone a few rounds. Yeah, I assume that every Irish priest must have been a boxer at some point. But there was a segue to where they needed several Irish type of, sing-along songs, etc. And Robert's background, just coincidentally, going through all these different meanderings, Robert has a fantastic brogue, and a lot of his music has a lot to do with Irish folk music, also parallel to a lot of Jethro Tull history and everything. So Robert and I actually wrote together several Irish drinking songs and things that made the film on the soundtrack.
It's an amazing story. So, Robert, like you worked as an advertising guy, you were copywriting, you were meeting folks like Ray along the way, working with Devo, sort of kind of blazing a bit of a trail when it came to re-records and things of that nature. But you also, through your background in advertising, in addition to working with bands like Devo, you did a lot of work with baseball players. Another big part of the reason why you're perfect for this show is you worked some pretty legendary names. How did you wind up working with Tony Gwynn? And talk a little bit about that.
I was very privileged to be able to do that. I had gotten a job at a advertising agency in San Diego by the name of Franklin and Associates, and one of their best accounts was the San Diego Padres. And as a result, I got to do a series of commercials for them in which we utilized Steve Garvey and the manager Jack McKeon, who was a real trip, and the great, of course, Tony Gwynn. I also worked with the legendary Jerry Coleman, who at that point was an announcer for the Padres and had been actually a manager for the Padres in 1980. Coleman himself was a legendary New York Yankee. He had been second baseman who alternated with Billy Martin and was the 1949 Rookie of the Year for the American League. But I would tell you that working with, certainly with Tony Gwynn, was a great honor. And while doing a commercial with him, which had to do with, and it was utilizing his greatest hits, literally, and showing how pitchers, especially this one pitcher for the Dodgers, I forget his name right now, but one Dodger so pissed off that we had a shot of him throwing his glove against the wall, and of course uttering the great expletive deleted that starts with an F. And Gwynn would go, "These are my guys. I love these guys," you know. And while doing that commercial, I ended up, and I've always been proud of this, I would love to show Junior this one day. Tony had opened up his trunk, and we were getting some stuff out of his trunk, and he pulled out these batting gloves that were covered in yellow Hubba Bubba banana bubble gum. And he looked at these, said, "I'm going to throw these out." Junior got all his gum all over these batting gloves, and now I can't use them. And I said, "Tony, can I keep those?" And he looked at me like I was nuts and said, "Yeah, you want them, you got them." But
so are you telling me that in your home somewhere you have a collection of Tony Gwynn's used batting gloves with Junior's pre-chewed Hubba Bubba all over him?
I do have one set of his batting gloves with Junior's pre-chewed bubble gum all over them.
That's amazing. That's the sort of thing I would love to see on Antiques Roadshow. I'd be like, just try and put a value on this. Pre-chewed Hubba Bubba on a legendary Legends batting glove. Go on. What's this worth to the right person? At auction, and how much should I get it insured for? Bearing in mind the DNA that's all over this stuff. That's amazing.
Right? That would be the provenance, wouldn't it? That and the commercial that I did would be the provenance. But you're right; they'd have to do a DNA on it. That would be funny.
Well, that's it. This is a great segue into like just kind of another parallel of all three of ours is our love for baseball, and obviously a big part of our podcast is the fact that both Adrian and I are huge Mets fans, but both of us having me growing up in New York, Adrian having lived in New York, and the interactions and everything, the current statuses of both of our favorite teams, yours being the Yankees and ours being the Mets, is a common thread. It's a common thread in our podcast, and being that today is the 1st of August, the day after the trading deadline, and the day after several things have now been put in motion about the rest of this particular season, it brought up something to mind that I wanted to ask Adrian about, related to the fact that as of today, the Mets literally did not sign our number one draft pick this year, Kumar Rocker, and took a pass on him because we've got some very delayed medical results that were enough to make the team say, you know what, we're going to forego our very first pick of 2021 and settle for a first round pick next year. And it had occurred to me that as of today, it's something that wouldn't have occurred to me under the Wilpons, that under the Cohen regime, that they wouldn't just throw money at it. And throwing money at things has always been a Yankee kind of mentality. And the Yankees, as of this year, Robert, it's kind of fascinating to me that they made moves that very intentionally kept them out of the luxury tax threshold situation. What's your opinion on how the Yankees just did it in their not only their draft, but also obviously in the trade deadline?
Well, I would tell you that I don't necessarily follow those things as intimately as you do, but you know my philosophy about this. And if they stop spending and throwing money at things the way they have for way too long now and just believe in their farm system, I think they'd be a lot better off. And you see how if you look at the entire league, you'll oftentimes find announcers saying about so many different stars, he started off as a Yankee. He started off as a Yankee. And I find my team constantly trading away great players when they're young. And if you notice, with all of the ILs that they've had over the last month, what do? They pull up these kids from the minors, and they all of a sudden start producing. Now, some of that has to do with the fact that the pitchers aren't familiar with these kids, but it also has to do with the fact that these kids are talented. And it has to do with how the farm system really is deep. And if the Yankees would depend and have faith in their farm system, they would do a lot better. So as far as money's concerned, I've always been against them doing this. It really hasn't worked for them, honestly, in a long term since Reggie Jackson, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, and also I think I think that probably a big part of the problem that a lot of people have with teams like the Yankees and like the Dodgers is this sort of like, there's this perception, and there's a lot more nuance to it than this, but there is this perception that these are just teams that buy championships, you know, and I think on the one hand, like Ray and I both hate to see big pieces of our farm system that we're looking forward to coming up get traded away.
Right.
But it happens when you are in a pennant race or you're in win now mode. And I think one of the things about the Yankees is, you know, they're like, we're the New York Yankees. We fully expect to be in win now mode. So they're always selling off prospects to buy someone that can bring something home this year. That's the impression I've gotten. And that's not just this year, but this is historically speaking. If I'm going to play devil's advocate for against angry Yankees fans, I would say that, you know, like it does definitely suck to see your farm system go away that way, but they're always, you know, feeling like they're on the verge of going all the way. That seems to be the Yankee mentality.
And I think, and in my personal opinion of it, that Yankee opinion of, win the World Series or bust, or that if you don't win the World Series, the season is a complete loss, has been to their detriment. And the win now attitude, I think the new Mets attitude and what should be the new Yankees attitude is not win now. It should be win every year, meaning always be in the hunt, always be there. And the Yankees, it's a very good example of the fact that their playoff history, just let's say over the last 10 years, has been a hole.
It's been atrocious.
Yeah. Exactly, and the Mets are a team where, you know, we're literally throwing our hands up at the idea of finishing over 500. The future of the Mets and the future of the Yankees, to me, is a win every year model of exactly what you said, Robert. Like, rely on those kids. If Luke Voit gets traded now because of the fact that they've picked up these other elements like Gallo, etc., right. I'd be very, very, very disappointed as a Yankee fan, and even as a casual fan watching them, because the guys like Luke Voit to me are true. They're Yankee. Those are Yankees for life.
Yes.
kind of players.
Yeah. Yeah, Voit is the sort of fellow that, in my mind, could actually be another captain of the Yankees. But I'm a traditionalist in that sense. And to be honest with you, I totally agree with both of you. I'm sick to death of the attitude that they can buy a championship. They have to get back to the idea of Billy Ball. My favorite Yankee is Thurman Munson. That was a Yankee. That was a captain. That was a guy who was clutch. That was a guy who, he started very young with the Indians, but he very quickly became a Yankee. And when you grow them that way, and you're right, if you're going to have a team, you maintain the team. You nurture the team. You don't give them off and trade them off after 6 months of performance. But, between Cashman and Boone, I'm not particularly very happy. I'm not. And if they continue this attitude that they can buy things, no results are going to be any different. And you're right, Ray. For the last 10 years, all I've seen is this ridiculous thrashing about in the in their wild card games. The Astros cheating notwithstanding.
I've said this before on the podcast, and Adrian, remember, one of my proudest moments as a Met fan, literally was back in the early 2000s at a home game against the Marlins, where the entire starting lineup of the Mets were all farmhands. Every single one of them, 1 through 9, had come up to the farm, and they were playing against the Marlins, who the Mets had just lost Reyes to, and Reyes obviously was in the starting lineup on the Marlins. So there were 10 players on the field as part of the starters that were all Mets farmhands, and I'd rather be proud of seeing a team of my own going all the way through and going for it as far as a World Series champion. There's obviously you bring in the veterans, and in the Mets history, our team became a team in the 80s by bringing in Keith Hernandez and Gary Carter, who had histories with other teams. But those guys cemented their place as being Mets, even before we won in '86. The Yankees have had guys like Paul O'Neill, who had a history with the Reds. He became a Yankee.
Yes.
There were guys that came over from other teams and they became Yankees. In terms of how they carried themselves, and they didn't feel like they were bought and sold or brought over. But Wade Boggs is a Red Sox, for Christ's sakes, but he is a Yankee legend for having won the series the way they did with him. So I hate to see just this rented player kind of attitude. And I admit I'm a prospect hugger in the terms of that. I want to hold on to these guys to see what they are, because I'd hate to have had Mike Trout in my team and watch him do what he's doing for his career on another team. So I totally empathize with you on that.
Yeah, I mean, so this, obviously what everyone is talking about today in Metsland is the Kumar Rocker situation. Now, if I think Steve Cohen put it on his Twitter, he basically said something to the effect of, first and foremost, we are not privy to the level of information they have on the guy that led to them not signing him. And there's a lot of ridiculous chatter from some sort of professional baseball journalists that'll say, that $6 million is just going to go into another gaudy painting that Steve Cohen's going to hang on his wall. Which is one of the stupidest things I've ever heard. This is chump change to the guy. But he said something to the effect that baseball draft picks are worth up to 5 times their slot value to clubs. I never shy away from investments that can make me that kind of return. So passing on Rocker sort of gets them a better draft pick next year. Bearing that in mind, you could argue that he's got an eye on the future and homegrown Mets, but there's a lot of people that are very angry and don't feel that way. How do you feel about this?
I personally think, if they went through the trouble of drafting him first, and they were even signing him supposedly above slot, which was, I believe, $6 million. Okay, that's $6 million to say, okay, he's got an injury right now. Let's see how that works out. And if it doesn't work out, that was a $6 million investment that didn't work out so well. I'm sure Jed Lowry right now is walking around with our $20 million in his pocket, and he had three at bats over two years with the Mets, and now he's killing it with the A's. So these are investments that sometimes work out, sometimes don't. I would have much rather today have seen them say, you know what, Kumar, here's your $6 million. Let's go get you worked on. Let's get this checked out, because the guy has shown that he had talent. If he comes back a couple of years now, or even a year from now, and he re-enters the draft or just debuts for a team, and he's the mustard, I'm going to be really, really, really pissed off that they said, wait a second, we threw a first round draft pick at this kid and didn't have the faith to just, okay, let's take a chance on him. Didn't Matt Allen or JT Ginn or one of our young pitchers that we did sign last year in the draft, they went straight into either a Tommy John situation or a surgery situation. They're young kids. They're gonna rebound, we hope. I would have liked to have seen them say, let's give Kumar a chance to get through a year or so of healing, because another thing that I have brought up in the past that I kind of wanted to segue into is the fact that to me, the depth that we've been developing and trying to build up on our team, and that the Yankees should maybe build up on their team, there's an investment in pitchers that I think will be addressed or should be addressed in the new CBA that's coming up, in the fact that pitchers are almost a completely separate team from the offensive team. And if they're going to do anything in the CBA, I would like to see them take the pitching staff, or I would call it the pitching department, and I would like them to expand that to where you have not, say, 13 pitchers on your major league roster, and then obviously your minor league teams. I'd like to see them expand it to where pitchers are, part of a department. They're protected if they get hurt. If a guy like Syndergaard gets Tommy John surgery, it doesn't affect the team massively, and it's going to take a year and a half to 2 years before he comes back. Let's not make this like it's so devastating to his career or to our team. Let's expand these pitching departments so that it's much easier for pitchers to go back and forth between the minors and the majors, so that they can stay in the rotations, they can stay keeping up their workouts. And I just think it'd be a smarter way of handling pitchers. And what you were saying just before, about or bringing up Kumar, it brings me to that point of what I think should be a new mode in terms of the CBA and how they deal with pitchers. And Robert and I were talking about the CBA actually just a couple of days ago. And Robert, you had a very, very interesting take on the CBA and the business aspects of baseball. Do you recall what we were talking about?
Are you talking about my idea for a constitutional convention for baseball?
Exactly.
Is that what you mean?
Exactly. Tell us more about what your concept was, because I think it's actually a great idea.
I believe there should be a constitutional convention for baseball, actually involving a national fan association that actually, as fans, who has more insight or more reason to care about the game and to determine certain rules, to establish things or to reestablish a sense of tradition. I mean, between you and I hope they're not going to continue it next year, I hate this idea of putting runners on second base in extra innings. That they've now decided. I hate that doubleheaders are now 7 innings. I mean, I could go on and on with some of these rules that they're having. And the things that they're doing now, I think that there should be a fan organization that's involved in this constitutional convention as well. Of course, the owners wouldn't like that, but who matters more? You can talk about corporate sponsorship all you like, but what does that really boil down to? The demographics of fans. So if fans actually were to organize their own national association, they would find themselves with as much power as the sports writers organizations have in this country. And you guys were kind of depressing me talking about this, because all I can think of is Giancarlo Stanton and how he will never pay for himself. And I've got nothing against Stanton. I mean, he got a great deal, but as opposed to Cole, who is definitely paying for himself, I don't care how many singles, I don't care how many hits Stanton gets, he's never going to pay for himself, ever.
But that's Cashman. That is something that probably should have cost Cashman his job.
His job. I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
The only thing Cashman has done that I think secured his position or secured his job in the last couple of years was his quote unquote fire sale with the Cubs back in 2015, where he basically loaned them Chapman in exchange for a bunch of young prospects, and he retooled and reorganized their entire farm system in just the span of a couple of weeks at the trade deadline in 2015, of which they have players that are playing for them now that are lifelong Yankees. So I completely agree with you. I think the fan representation in the trifecta of the Players Association, the Major League Baseball owners, and the fans should be basically a threesome in terms of how the game is stewarded.
I totally agree.
I mean, as Mets fans, we're very aware of this concept because, every time we got a crushing blow of disappointment courtesy of the Wilpons, there was all this talk, and it never really translated into much, but there was all this talk of like, you guys, we just have to stop buying tickets and refuse to go. That way, we'll be able to get rid of the Wilpons. And the Wilpons, I don't know what it was. They'd been in the box for long time and people just kept throwing at their heads. I can't imagine showing up for work every single day, no matter how passionate I was about the subject matter, and be like, oh wow, everybody hates me. I want to do this for another season. Who knows exactly what made them pull the trigger on selling the team to Cohen. But this notion of giving power back to the fan base by having them decide with their ticket buying dollar with the direction that the team should take is definitely something that's been bandied around. It's just never been organized the way you described.
That's right. And it would take some serious organization to do it, but I believe it could be done. It really could be. But it would take somebody with the focus and the capital and the time to do it. But it could be done. And once fans could actually see that they had leverage, then you would see, I think, a groundswell.
I mean, I think one thing that everybody can agree on right now is baseball's not right. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where everything, I think we're all so glad to have baseball back after, a year and a half of COVID. And we all held our breath and wondered if people were going to get to go to games and wonder if there was going to be a season and how long that season was. And it was. And now we find out there's a real 162 game season with fans in the stands. It's a giant sigh of relief. If you are like me, baseball's all you've got. You just sit there and wait for the season to start all year long. And to have it delayed last time was a big, big problem. But I think that there are so many weird things. They're like, well, people are hitting too many home runs, so we're going to deaden the balls. Oh, now pitchers are getting too many strikeouts, so we're going to move them out. It's like, or you could have just left it the freaking same. Oh, we're going to shorten the game to 7 innings. Oh, we're going to put a runner on second. And, there's sort of like the idea of manipulation of playing time as people come up from the farm system to maintain control on the players. The players aren't happy about that. The players want, the best opportunity for themselves, and they want it to be competitive. You don't want to have a quadruple A team like, the Pittsburgh Pirates to deal with in your division. I mean, as much as it might be nice to have something to feast on, even though I believe we got our asses handed to us by them, the idea is you want everybody able to compete at a high level without some sort of manipulation of salaries and playing time. And when was the last time, you guys are better with this stuff than I am, but when was the last time that there was a CBA? When was the last time, or some sort of big come together where this stuff was
Ray
addressed?
would know this.
Well, it happens every couple of years, and obviously the big one was in 2004. When the season was basically interrupted. The Yankees were on their way at that time to probably making the playoffs. Tony Gwynn happened to be on the verge of being the last hitter of hitting 400,
Close
but the
400,
season was right. The season was stopped, so they lost a lot of momentum at that time, and it affected a lot of things. I'm sorry, I apologize. I said 2004. That was 1994. I'm fast forwarding a decade, but every several years the CBA has come up for debate between the Players Association and the baseball and the MLB, and there's just been a very obvious thing that neither one of them can get their heads out of their asses to make some kind of decisions that are for the general welfare and the general benefit of the team of the league itself. The CBA, for instance, that's coming up. There's a lot of things that this CBA is a little bit different than CBAs in the past. It's a reorganization of what the agreement between the players and the owners are for what they'll accept. And that has everything to do with money. It has to do with return of investments. It has to do with players' roles. It has to do with the minors. It has to do with literally every aspect of the game. So it's actually an opportunity for them, if they took it, to say, what do we do or what can we do to really make this work properly? But they have never taken that opportunity to literally look at it pragmatically and say, this would be a very reasonable and smart thing to do. Robert's example of how, in COVID times, I understand why they made doubleheaders, 7-inning games, because they were trying to, kind of be a little bit easy in COVID times on players and, how they had to be. Same as there being a taxi squad of players available if somebody went down. The runner on second base starting in extra innings had that same concept of, this is better for the game because rather than sitting through 15 or 16 innings of an extra inning game, which doesn't happen that often, by the way, they said, let's have a runner on second base, and it'll inspire aggressive play. Me personally, as a baseball fan of the history of the game and fan of how the game has been played, I had no animus towards the fact that in '68 the pitchers were such a dominant force that it made them say, we're going to make a change, and they changed the level of the pitching mound, and it had a profound difference in how dominant the pitchers were at the time. But I think many of the things that they're talking about now in terms of moving the pitching mound back 12 inches or, several on-field changes, I don't think those are necessarily necessary in the terms of, remember what I was talking about earlier, if we looked at the teams themselves and how many players that teams have available to themselves on the bench, or how many pitchers you have on your pitching staff, if you expanded those to where everybody has a little bit more breathing room and a little bit more ability to protect themselves and be careful, that might reap huge benefits in terms of the injured reserve list. It would actually put several more players on each team as full salary players. The Players Association would love to have many more players getting full salaries to them, and it could also be reverse engineered to the fact that the luxury tax threshold that is definitely going to be raised should accompany a minimum spending threshold, where teams like the Pittsburgh Pirates cannot get away with putting a minor league team that they're barely paying the salary of Giancarlo Stanton to the entire Pittsburgh Pirates team. There needs to be minimums and maximums if you're not going to incorporate some sort of salary cap on players. So I think the ideas that both of you we were bantering about, the CBA is an opportunity for something to happen. It's just that neither one of them have looked at it as an opportunity to embetter anything.
I think also the baseball's changed a good deal since the last one of these situations. I mean, just when I look at sort of things like the offense being down the way it has been across the entire all of Major League Baseball, the offense has been down. Injuries have been up. Clearly some things are very different, and especially when it comes to the long-term worth of a pitcher. You got people spending their very best years as a pitcher making league minimum, and then they burn themselves out and they're not worth the big contract that they justifiably could have earned up until that point because they're just being overtaxed. I think pitchers especially, and to your point of pitchers needing to be treated as a separate animal, Ray, I think pitchers especially will have some real sort of ammunition when it comes to being like, hey, this is jacked up and it needs to change moving forward if you want to keep us doing this.
Well, it's a very good thing that also Robert. It's something that Robert was talking about. I'm literally handing this to Robert. Your fight the power attitude that you brought to advertising, etc., and fight the power kind of aspect. I genuinely feel that in terms of, say, the pitchers, in terms of, I want to see them reap the rewards that they can reap, but if these were football players we're talking about, football players have almost a 10-year career, and that's it. And they are destroyed. They're physically destroyed. Pitchers, you as a historian of baseball and fans of legendary teams, I've spoken to you many times where you've been very hard of like, hey, the pitchers these days, they're sissies. They barely throw 5 innings.
They're pampered.
They're pampered. My personal opinion is I am actually kind of for pampering them in terms of they're not going to have 20-year pitching careers anymore. And as Adrian said, get the best 10 years of them that you can. Let them make the money that they can when they can, and be flexible that we can rotate them out without it affecting the team or teams nearly as much as it does right now. If the Pirates could afford a good pitcher, they'd have one single pitcher, and if that guy went down, their season is destroyed. And I don't think that's a benefit to baseball.
Well, one of the things I wanted to get back to, and I agree with you, is that many of these things that they have affected in the last number of years, you can talk about it being COVID, and to a degree that's true. But one of the essences that many people in baseball have been trying to affect for a very long time is the length of the game, as you know. And I mean, within the last couple of years, there were how many times a batter could step out of the box. There were so many things, and that's what they've been doing. So many of these things are really creative ways to try to speed up the game. And some of them are getting so overboard, I'm almost motivated to suggest maybe they could have pole dancers at every base, or especially at home plate. Of course, I admit that might slow down the game, but it also might speed it up.
Well, clocks running on the pitcher in terms of what the turnaround time between pitches is one thing. Not allowing a batter to even step out of the batter. Once you're at bat and you step into the batter's box, you know what? Other than a wild pitch or some ball thrown away, maybe mandatory that you need to stay in the box. The box is your position to where you have to be in when you're batting, and stay in there. Don't adjust your batting gloves every at bat. And there are certain things that are maybe incrementally determinative of how long the game lasts.
I never disagree with Ray, but hard disagree on that one. Because honestly, this is maybe the first time I can remember us ever talking about. I remember being less angry or more angry about the same stuff, but to me, the battle between a pitcher and a batter is one of the most intense psychological battles that will ever happen in the world, especially in the world of sports. And in terms of speeding up the amount of time that you can take between pitches, some pitchers work fast, some pitchers work a little bit slower. I mean, it really is, these people are finely tuned machines that are doing what a lot of people say is the most difficult thing you can do in sports, which is to hit a baseball if you're the batter, or to throw the baseball if you are the pitcher. There's a reason why these folks are paid what they're paid when they're good at it. It's a very, very rare thing. So I think you're dealing with such a teeny tiny minority of the population of the earth that can do this stuff. If they need to take a second to adjust their freaking batting glove, they get that second. I have spoken.
I get what you're saying, and I appreciate what you're saying. I think the realities of the attention span of children, and a lot of things of today are having influence on how they're looking at the game. So for me, I wouldn't cut away for commercials during the middle inning. But that would devastate TV revenues. There are things that I think the CBA or the Major League Baseball, the Players Association, can and should address, and I think there's things that they should address that are genuinely caring about the game. But they've never showed it. They've never showed a history of doing that. So it's a little sad to think about it that way. Now, Robert, I remember talking to you about the Yankees, and you're totally right. There's been a lot of things as a Yankee fan that have really been pissing you off lately, and I acknowledge that. I understand that because I talk to a lot of Yankee friends who are feeling the same way about their team, not knowing necessarily that you haven't paid attention very well to what they just did in the last couple of days. They basically made what would be considered wholesale trades to try to bring in what the team needs. For instance, they're an incredibly right-handed heavy team for a team that plays in Yankee Stadium that should have tons of lefties on it. So they did actually, by picking up Joey Gallo, they tried to do these things. But basically a lot of the things they did kept them still under the luxury tax threshold, which from what I see from Cashman and from Hal Steinbrenner, their motive seems to be trying to stay under that threshold. And that's a very un-Yankee way of doing things. Maybe there's a chance that they start to look at their farm teams and start to say that they need to do this in a more organic way. For your sake, as a Yankee fan, I kind of hope they do. So, what's your vibe? What's your vibe on what you think the Yankees should do?
Well, I'm sick to death.
No. Wait, let me two-part that question. What's your vibe on what you think they should do, and what do you think they will end up doing?
Right. Very good.
I think they should definitely stop spending money the way they have. I wouldn't necessarily go completely in a Moneyball way, but I definitely believe in them believing in their farm system. As far as what I think they're going to do, I think they're going to continue to do what they've been doing, and the inertia is going to continue in this way until somebody gets fired, and then maybe something will change. But I don't see Cashman changing. I don't see Boone changing. I see no fire in their bellies. I see no difference. I see Hal Steinbrenner not really caring very much. So to be honest with you, as much as I want them to, and they're being this way right now, I believe, because they realize what the penalties would be if they weren't. But beyond that, maybe they've learned their lesson. Maybe they've realized that shooting their wad and doing short-term solutions isn't the best long-term answer for the Yankees.
Well, let me ask.
Would you trade? Going to change.
Would you trade Judge? Would you trade Judge as a kind of like, firecracker to like say this is how we're going to change the team? And
no, but I'll tell you. Yeah, I would build around Judge, but I was telling you this before, Ray, and I actually believe this. A lot of the injuries that you see with athletes today, I think are because many of the modern athletes their muscles are built up in ways that the old baseball players weren't. And they're not necessarily muscles that they necessarily need for the sport. And those muscles get so overdone and so overgrown that they blow them out every other day.
Also, I think when you look at someone like Aaron Judge dealing with any kind of an injury, I think, I don't know at what point, giantism is a thing. No, I genuinely don't. But you look at someone like him or Yao Ming, who used to play for the Houston Rockets, you get to some people that are just they're two standard deviations away from the mean when it comes to how big they are. And I think that, like Aaron Judge falls into that category where any kind of injury he sustains, you got to go look at what he's carrying around. He's carrying around a full Aaron Judge every single day. Like, that's got to put some wear and tear on the body that the rest of us don't have to deal with.
And as I've discussed with Ray, Stanton, I call a porcelain doll because it's and I have nothing against Stanton. He seems like a good guy, but this guy is like a porcelain doll. He gets injured. How many times has he been on the IL list already this year? He misses so many games. It's not even, yeah.
He's been on every season except the 1 year that he was able to play, and I believe he played in roughly 130 games in the year that he won the MVP because he was able to stay on the field. But it was the rare occurrence that he stayed on the field more that time. He's missed more than 100 games a season, I think, for the majority of his entire career.
But you mean when he was still a Marlins, when he hit the 59 homers? Because the next year, I think he hit maybe 38 or something like that. And it was downhill from there.
Yeah.
And the Yankees have done this over and over again. The Giambis, the Encarnaciones, over and over and over again. And it's actually at this point nauseating. But I've been angry at Cashman ever since they tore down Yankee Stadium. So that's another story unto itself.
Well,
and one of the things,
Mets,
go on.
Our Mets have done the same thing. We've had the Mo Vaughns, and kind of that was during the Wilpon era of taking a flyer on an aged veteran or someone who's coming back from an injury to say, hey, maybe this guy's got it, and finding out.
Cross your fingers that the magic's still there.
Right, the guy does not have it.
One of the biggest thrills I ever had in watching a baseball game live was actually with an old Mets, and you'll certainly love this. He wasn't a Met anymore, but I was sitting right behind home plate when Darryl Strawberry hit his last homer at Dodger Stadium, and that was a magnificent experience because you could just tell from his swing and the way that ball left the bat and the sound it made, you knew it was gone. And it was truly an amazing experience. I could almost feel what Strawberry was feeling, You know what's interesting? So the Mets yesterday Friday. I apologize. They had a very interesting couple of things that were going on. One was the return of the black uniforms, which I'm a huge fan of. Yesterday, they also had a induction ceremony to the Mets Hall of Fame, which, in terms of being a Mets fan, the Hall of Fame of the Mets is something that's kind of you almost say it like a giant shrimp. They don't make they don't understand the same thing. Oxymoronic.
They're not a total oxymoron. But the Mets inducted 4 players basically. Al Jackson, who literally won the first game ever as a Met in '62, first complete game, etc. Ron Darling, John Matlack, and Edgar Alfonso. They inducted 4 more players into the Mets Hall of Fame, and it was a fantastic day in Mets history in terms of Piazza came back forward, Bobby Valentine came back forward. We celebrated our history similar to the way that the Yankees always celebrated a fantastic history. Old Timers Day in Yankee Stadium is even something that I watched every year. So this was a historic weekend for the Mets in terms of how and what they were doing. And I was thinking about that earlier when I was thinking about the fact that we were going to be obviously talking a lot of Yankee stuff. It was one of the only times where the Mets have shown their history or wore their history on a sleeve the way that the Yankees do. You've benefited from the fact of being around for so much Yankee history, or having followed so much Yankee history. It's it's a mitzvah to me. It's fantastic.
It is. A Yankee history, in my mind, is also Mets history. I mean, when you think of the connection between Casey Stengel and Yogi Berra alone, I mean, to me, that's family. And Joe Torre. Exactly. That to me is family. And one last thing I would say about Yogi is my experience with the Padres. I was down on Jack Murphy Stadium. They were playing the Astros, and this was in '89, and Yogi was then the batting coach for the Astros. And I caught Yogi in center field, and I picked up a ball, and I walked over to Yogi, and I said to him, Yogi, I am a big Yankee fan. And he was really angry at the Yankees, and he goes, oh, you're a Yankee fan, huh? I go, yeah, I love the Yankees. God, I love you, Yogi. Would you sign my ball? And I gave him the ball, and he goes, oh, you want me to sign the ball, huh? And he took the ball, and he signed it in the worst possible place where he could, where it says cork on it. And because he was really angry at the Yankees, he goes, here's your ball, kid. And then he threw me the ball. But to be honest with you, I think that ball is probably even worth more as a result of him doing that. And on top of that, it's a Bartlett Giamatti ball. So it has that going for it as well.
Well, I just think my favorite part of this story was I walked up to Yogi Berra. There's a very short list of people I know, and I think you're the only one on it that can say that. And it's just like I walked up to Yogi Berra. Unless you happen to run into him at a diner while he was around, that's not possible. You walked up to him at a ballpark
on the field. Yeah, on the field.
That's insane.
I was honored, I would tell you. Yeah.
This has been actually fantastic, and one thing I want to point out to any listeners out there, the tens of listeners, if you have any interest at all in any of Robert's creative outputs, his writings, etc. Robert, your latest book, Don't You Know Who I Am? You were telling me what outlets that's available at. I'd love to tell people where they can actually get their own copy of Don't You Know Who I Am.
Don't You Know Who I Am is actually from somebody who actually saw it all live and in person, an expose on the rock and roll world in Hollywood. And it's based on my own experiences and what I saw in there. And it is available on Amazon, as well as Book Soup on Sunset Strip in West Hollywood. And I would tell you that in coming full circle between music and baseball, in Don't You Know Who I Am, you'll see that the band that I write about, which again is a composite of many bands that I worked with, they perform at several baseball venues. And I have to tell you, when you think about the relationship between music and baseball, some of the greatest concerts I've ever seen have been at baseball venues. Like I saw the Rolling Stones at Dodger Stadium in '98. And some of the, as I said, some of the greatest concerts, I'm sure you guys have seen some great concerts as well at different baseball venues.
I brought Metallica on stage.
Awesome.
I brought Metallica on stage at Petco Park in San Diego.
Oh man,
awesome! That's the one I write about, actually.
Obviously, the Beatles playing at Shea Stadium, I think, is the quintessential.
It is.
Like there's no other comparison. I personally,
well put.
I got to see Black Sabbath open up Arizona's
Diamondback.
Yes, the Phoenix Stadium was the first show ever there, and it was absolutely incredible. And there's a thing about the way the baseball stadium is laid out that either is a fantastic way to see a concert, or I could only imagine that the actual elements, as a production manager myself, of how the Beatles actually played Shea Stadium, it must have been a nightmare.
Well, do you know that when the Beatles played Shea Stadium, they didn't have a sound system there. They were just coming through the PA, like the public address of like they were coming through speakers that were completely unsuitable.
Right. It's funny you say that, Adrian, because I write about that actually in Don't You Know Who I Am as well, in which, people are always criticizing the Beatles and saying they weren't good in live performance. And the truth is they couldn't hear themselves. You could not hear yourself in those days.
It's interesting. It's funny because you were good enough to send me a copy of the book, and I was like, all right, well, I want to support, and I always, I'm very big into audiobooks, because that means that when you're done reading and you got to get in the car, you can continue reading even if you're just listening. And I was just like, I don't believe there's an Audible of this, and I was just like, Robert and Ray should work on this together. I think that they should produce the audiobook.
Holy
good
crap.
idea.
That's such a great idea. I never ever thought of that. And Robert, that is, I am down like a clown, Charlie Brown. That is awesome. That's an awesome idea.
Well, and it occurred to me as I was listening to people may or may not know this. I don't think we've ever given you credit, Ray, but the rather spiffy intro music that we have for this podcast that we do comes completely from the mind and fingertips of one Raymond Amico. So I was like, as I was leafing through the book and realizing there was no audio book, I was like, gee, this would be good. And also, what would be amazing between the chapters, little musical breaks, or or sort of something that's appropriate to the background of what's going on. I was just like, I thank you for reminding me of that. I think this should be a thing that you do.
Yeah, good idea, Adrian. There's a lot of songs in it as well. So, yeah.
Yep.
Wow. So we have single-handedly solved the CBA in baseball. Uh-huh. We've come up now with a completely new version of Robert's book, which is going to win. What's a book award? An Emmy? An Oscar? What's the book awards?
Well, you can win a Grammy for best audiobook.
Yeah. There you go.
There you go. That's a great idea. One other thing I want to say, just to put a bee in people's bonnets. I am sick to death of how sports announcers think they are paid by the word, and I would like them to stop talking on every single play. Allow some of the ambiance of the damn game to come into my living room. I don't need to hear about how some player's mother knitted him a jock strap. I don't need to hear any of that. I really don't. Yeah.
Now, Robert, see, you don't benefit from having the greatest colored,
in
the greatest booth in baseball history, as we do, because
you're right. You're right.
Yeah, as legendary as the Yankees
Phil
broadcasters.
Rizzuto.
That you're Bill White. Going back through the history of Yankees broadcasters, I think they've been a lot better than their current their current iteration is. But the Mets, we benefit from having not only the best TV broadcast, but also the best radio broadcast.
No, you do. Now, I have to say John Smoltz isn't bad, but I was spoiled. The very first two guys I ever heard were Dizzy Dean and Pee Wee Reese.
Well, I think the other thing is that you have to bear in mind is you are a New York Yankees fan. You are accustomed and sort of attuned to the idea of winning. You expect to win.
You're right.
We are New York Mets fans. We do not expect to win a good deal of the time. And we have been blessed with not only the best booth in baseball, but also Gary, Keith, and Ron are unbelievably entertaining. When a game goes south, that's when they really shine. Like that's when they find a way. They find a way to keep us all engaged on a complete blowout, and it's a magical ability that they've got. I don't think I've ever heard anybody else do it quite so artfully. So, I could understand why you want the ambiance of the game. Sometimes we, as New York Mets fans, want the exact opposite.
Yeah.
No, but to allow the game to breathe, to actually go into the person's living room, that's important. And so many times these announcers are actually talking over the action. They're not even telling you the play-by-play.
See, what's weird?
But you're going back to the Red Barbers and the Vince Scullys and the guys who really knew what they were doing.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. And here's what's interesting. I do see your point because I can put on a baseball game as I'm driving, and quite often, I'll listen to I love Howie for the Mets, but if it's a day where Gary, Keith, and Ron are all on, I will put the audio from the game on because I am a huge Keith Hernandez fan, as all Mets fans are. But as a broadcaster,
I love him too.
As a broadcast, I think that guy, he's in the Mets Hall of Fame. He should be in the Baseball Hall of Fame as a player and as a broadcaster because I think he's just so good. And so I love listening to him. And it's interesting. I can listen to the television broadcast and not feel like I'm missing a thing without watching it as I drive. And that does speak to the fact that they are letting you know exactly what's happening at all times.
Radio is one thing, but for TV, I wouldn't mind a C-SPAN of sports. I really wouldn't. A C-SPAN of sports.
Robert, when you started watching baseball, I believe it was all megaphones, wasn't it? Wasn't it a...
Well, we used to use our Civil War hearing horns. But normally the dinosaurs would knock that off as they walk by.
When you rode your Stegosaurus to Yankee Stadium, how did you listen to the game?
That's right. Well, Fred Flintstone once ran over my foot as I was standing there, and it really ruined the game for me, I have to tell you.
I'm telling you, this kid Babe Ruth, he's going to be something special. Hey, 1-2-1-2, we're coming over.
Actually, Bill Graham almost actually ran over my foot at the US Festival, but that's another story. He really did. He almost ran over my foot.
Oh my
With
God.
what?
His ATV. I was there really early in the morning. It was, Apple was the US Festival.
Yeah, sure.
It was in the San Bernardino Mountains. I was there at 6 or 7 in the morning before the thing, and there was this fog, and I was standing by this road, and I saw this guy coming by on a giant ATV. He literally came 1 inch by my foot. It was Bill Graham. I couldn't believe it. It was Bill Graham.
Did you know Bill Graham?
No, I did not know Bill Graham beyond seeing him there, but I always had that kind of Gump experience. I've always had that kind of Gumpian sort of talent.
Well, I mean, also, Bill Graham is a legendary figure, so that's interesting. Like a Bill Graham ran me over story is pretty good. Like.
Yeah, it is. It's pretty fun. But I've been lucky in that way. It's like as Ray was saying, if I invented a musical instrument out of ohia lohui wood from Hawaii, the next thing I know, Dr. Demento was playing my songs on his show. So I've always had some sort of luck that way.
Yeah. This will mean nothing to anybody on that's listening to the podcast. But have you, Ray? Did you ever introduce Robert to Al Marks? Because I would have to imagine there's an awful lot of they must have been at a lot of the same things.
You know what? I've been talking to Robert about several of the people that I've been interacting with, like not only for the longest time ever, but even new people. And there's several people that I just know Robert would interact with and bond with really, really well. Al Marks is the perfect example of someone that Robert I would love to have the opportunity to introduce you to. He's a legend in the music business. He's just kind of been a record rep for everybody that you could possibly imagine, and you and him are kindred spirits.
Well, you both there's all these amazing historical moments in music history, like the US Festival, where a lot of people have heard about them, and you two probably have more. Oh yeah, I was there stories than anybody I know.
Oh, man, I was there when Cheetah Chrome was stabbed in the stomach in front of CBGB's, if you guys have ever heard about that. But that's a totally different story altogether. You ever heard of Cheetah Chrome from the Dead Boys?
I have heard of Cheetah Chrome from the Dead Boys, but I didn't know about him being stabbed outside of CB's.
Oh, yeah, that was a big deal back then. But, shit like that was always going down around there.
That's a rite of passage. That's a CBGB's rite of passage. You're
right. That's making your bones at CBGB's.
Yeah. It's either you get stabbed or you got to go to the bathroom in the toilet there. Like either one, you've earned your stripes from either one of those.
The stories of Deborah Harry complaining about that bathroom, that's legendary.
Actually, you'd have to ask people, would you rather be stabbed in front of CB's or have to go to the bathroom there? And I think it'd literally be like a 50-50 split of people choosing which one they'd hate worse.
Well, or that or avoiding Hilly's dog pile of shit everywhere. You remember that?
Yep, and the old woman, the old lady who used to do the bookings there.
Oh my God! Everybody thought that was his wife. Everybody thought that was his wife. Yeah.
No, she hated our guts. Like at the Six Miles, she hated us.
She hated everybody's guts.
I have to imagine if it was that much of a rite of passage, it might have wound up on a Dead Boys set list, like Sonic Reducer, Ain't It Fun, stomach stabbing, and we get back to it.
There you go.
So I think now would be an appropriate time to talk about food. Do you, Ray? Did you have something to add?
No, I was about to say I'm starving, and this is a perfectly fantastic time to start talking about food. Robert lives currently in southern Florida, and that's giving you opportunity to grow a lot of your own stuff because of obviously the temperate climate and everything. You've been telling me a lot about a lot of the fruits and stuff that you've been growing in your own garden.
Yeah, I actually also have a place in Hawaii, and I was inspired by many of the things I saw done in Hawaii to do them here. I'm basically on the cusp of the Everglades, and I'm growing everything here from purple passion fruit to lychee to banana, and one of the things I'm growing a lot of right now is pineapple. Pineapple is actually a very easy thing for everybody to grow if they know what they're doing, and in doing that, I'm actually then taking the pineapple, and as I was telling you guys earlier, rather than just eating the pineapple, which becomes very hard to do, the easiest way to eat a lot of quantity of fruit is to puree it, is to juice it. And as Jack LaLanne was selling his little juice machines in the 90s, I take the pineapple and I juice it up, and I'm literally drinking an entire pineapple in one glass.
And for you younger podcast listeners, Jack LaLanne is basically The Rock from the 50s and 60s and 70s. If you don't know who Jack LaLanne was,
he's the guy who popularized exercising. That's very true.
You're exactly right.
Yeah. No, I think Jack LaLanne, I think perhaps doesn't get enough credit for being the father of fitness. You know what I mean?
He doesn't.
And I think obviously he sold products, but it wasn't in the predatorial way that people do now. When I look, when I see old videos of Jack LaLanne, I feel like he was genuinely in it to help people.
He was, and I'm still tickled by the fact that at the age of 80, he was like towing, what was it, like a dozen rowboats in the water or something while swimming. I mean, he would do ridiculous feats of strength, but you're right. Everything he did was beneficial.
He was doing that for the chicks. Come on.
I believe Jack LaLanne strained something. Want to rub some Bengay on it?
In God we trust. Yeah, in God we trust.
And anyone who's listening to the broadcast who is not old, Bengay was a muscle relaxant that you rubbed on your legs and arms when you had a muscle pull. Yeah. In case you don't know who Bengay was.
A truss is a leather athletic supporter.
Is Bengay not a thing anymore? I think Bengay's a thing.
It's still around, but I don't know that anybody wears a truss anymore.
No.
Good point.
All right, so you've been juicing many a pineapple. That's awesome. Do you, Ray and I both live in the desert. Can we grow pineapples too?
Yeah, actually you could. It's quite easy. Take a pineapple, cut the head off, stick it in a pot, and just basically water it. It will grow. Now, the thing of it is it will produce a pineapple. The question is whether or not that pineapple is necessarily good. What it really produces, what you really want, is it produces offspring. It produces offspring that shoots out of the neck of the plant. Those are called shooters, or it comes out of the base right next to the plant, and those are called suckers. And those pineapple plants will produce the best pineapples you've ever eaten.
But is it temperate? Simple. But is it temperate to different zones? Like, is it unstable or
no? All you need, you got heat there. So if you wanted to grow it there, all you got to do is make sure it's watered and drained properly. So if you put it in a pot, you make sure that the pot has holes in it, but you just water it. You can feed it. You can give it fish emulsion, fish fertilizer. All fruit likes that kind of stuff, but you just water pineapples. That's what they love. You can't actually drown a pineapple. It loves water.
That's the name of my next record. You cannot drown a pineapple.
There you go.
My name of my Rex record. Excuse me. I talk professionally for a living. Can you tell? The name of my next record is Shooters, Suckers, and Trusses, according to Robert Miltenberg.
Oh, I love it. I'll do the liners. I'll do the liner notes.
Robert, this has been awesome. I'm so happy that we got to incorporate you into our podcast because like the name of the podcast is Bands, Baseball, and Barbecue. You literally incorporate every single aspect of exactly what Adrian and I love to talk about. So it's been an absolute joy that we got to get you on here with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
No, I appreciate that. And if anybody wants to contact me, they can on Instagram at Miltenberg the author. So I appreciate you guys having me on your podcast.
Thank you so much.
What's this Instagram thing you're talking about?
What do you mean? What's that? Oh, that's right.
Is it like my face?
Yeah, it's like your face. It's like your face. And I'd rather think of your face than Zuckerberg's face. So yeah, it's your face.
I think it's time to apply some Bengay, crank up the Triceratops, and ride out of here.
And wear a truss. You're right. Get the truss on and let's go.